You are about to enter the traffic light zone. Gotta get my timer going. I'm your host going through the traffic light zone. My name is Tyler. I'm a traffic engineer. I work down in Dakota County. I want to make sure we're clear here that, I get it. I'm a numbtot. I live on Lindale. I bike. I take transit. It kind of sucks down there. I want you to know. I know there's a lot of advocates here that, not every traffic engineer has this old fuddy-duddy, old school, Robert Moses type of thinking. There's a new change, and there's a kind of a sea change that's happening within the industry, where we think about making sure that systems are equitable, making sure they're safe, making sure we're thinking of every vulnerable user, in addition to the efficiency that comes with traffic engineering. So we're getting better. We're doing it. Fuck Robert Moses. Okay. Let's get right into it. We got a lot to talk about right now, and we're going to go to the very, very basics here. This is a traffic signal, right? We all know how these things work, right? Green, yellow, red. We're going to talk a little bit about the things that maybe you don't know. First off, how do you actually know? How does the traffic signal know if you're there or not? Well, we use detectors. Sometimes we use cameras. A lot of times we use loop detectors, and that's what this is. It's essentially an electromagnet, right? When you were a kid, you had the nail with the wire wrapped around it. Those put out an electromagnetic field. And what happens is when a vehicle or a bike or somebody drives over that loop, it tells the signal controller, the brains of the operation, that, hey, somebody's here, you need to give that thing time, okay? And we've actually got a couple of these right down here. It's pretty much a computer. You guys can come up here at the end of this and check all this stuff out. There's a newer one on the bottom that's kind of like just a classic computer, right? But there's a really, really old one that's essentially a machine, right? And it spins, and it's pretty wild. If come on up when we're going through, and you can check it out. So let's think about a little bit of what the controller is thinking, right? This is a computer. How do we get a non-computerized thing, right? The world isn't a binary system. How do we get that to get into the computer's brain? So one of the ways we do that is, starting off with some vocab here, we have a phase. A phase is essentially a way to designate a unique movement for a traffic signal, okay? So in this example, we have a northbound left, that's phase 3. The controller doesn't think of it as northbound left, right? They think of it as bleep, 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 phase 3, right? The split is the time that you designate for that phase, and then you add up all your splits to the full cycle length, right? And that's kind of a cycle is a way to think about serving every movement within the intersection one time, at least, right? When I was practicing this presentation, I gave it to my wife, and she had good questions that I wasn't really thinking people were going to ask. And I'm gonna give you some prep on what this thing even is here. So, if it shows up, it won't even show up. So on the top, we have the top bar and the bottom bar. Those are essentially what can occur at the same time, right? So if you look at 0 seconds, right, the cycle starts off at 0. If we go to 15 seconds, during that time we have, if you can see that, it might not show up. It shows on the wall, but it doesn't show on the thing I need it to show on. That's okay. I've got hands. So at this spot right here, we have the left, both of those lefts are up at the same time, right? But there's a small period where you have the left and the through are up together, right? Because they're not conflicting, right? That's essentially a way for the computer to think of what can and can't run at the same time, right? There's a lot, we could talk a long time about that, but there's a lot to cover in this, so I'm gonna just leave that at that. If there's any questions on that, please, feel free to let us know. The thing you wanna know about what a cycle is actually doing though, is that at the very end, at 120, this is a 120 second cycle, it'll go back to the 0 point, right? So if you think about taking that both of those bands up on top and kind of making like a Mobius strip around itself, it does one of these. Right? So we're kind of going back to that same point. It repeats that cycle every single time. Right? So how do we decide how long a cycle needs to operate for? Well, there's kind of a sweet spot, right? The longer you have a cycle length, the more traffic volume can get through, right? But then that's also more delay that you have. You would think that the smaller the cycle length, the better, right? And that is true to a degree, but there's a certain critical point here where things kind of exponentially get nonlinear and weird. So, because if it's too short, you're not able to service the pedestrians that need their time or the vehicles that need their time. So there's a sweet spot for each volume case you have to think about, and that's kind of what the whole thought of all this is figuring out what that cycle length is, because that cycle length needs to be consistent throughout your whole corridor to get progression. And then we have coordinated phases. I'm not going to bother talking about that. Essentially, it's a reference of what your points are, right? How does one point reference another point? Okay. So this is kind of where we get into that Twilight Zone heady space time here. So this is a time-space diagram, okay? And this is what traffic engineers use to visualize progression along the corridor. So on the top horizontal axis, we have time, which is consistently moving, right? It's always moving forward. On the vertical axis, we have distance, or space, right? And those are spaced out, scaled to exactly the level that they are within the intersection. And then each of these here tells you when it's running green and when it's running red, okay? These blue and red lines, that is each vehicle's trajectory path, right? So this is thinking of this is the matrix, right? We're looking at things as every vehicle is a line. And you're trying to get these platoons lumped together to get safe and efficient progression across these. So we talk about what these lines are. We have, we're looking at your rise over run, right? Distance over time, miles per hour. The steeper that your line is, the faster you're going, right? Whereas the shallower your line is, the slower you're going. If you have a totally flat line, like you do here with this blue, time is moving, but you're not, right? You're standing still. You're delayed, right? So that's kind of how you measure that delay. Is they're coming into this red, they have to wait, and then now this is green, then they can go, right, with the rest of their platoon. So that's kind of that idea of what, like, from a vehicle standpoint, progression is. We tried to get my model going here. I've got one. We'll go through it at the end. If people are interested, you can come on up and I can show you the full. It's essentially a SimCity model where I make all the signal timing data is in there, and then we move these things around and control when those green operations operate in relation to other green operations, right? We're not going to do that right now. Right now we're going to talk a little bit about the traffic data, right? Traffic data changes throughout the course of the day, right? We know that we have different levels of traffic during the AM peak versus midnight, right? People are traveling, right? And it's also can be directional sometimes. So that's what this first thing is showing. The red and the blue are different directions. If you decided that you wanted to have one traffic plan to run throughout the day, you could do that, right? You could say, let's run a 90-second plan all day. Now, during the PM peak, you might not have enough cycle time to service all that volume. And then in the middle of the day, you might have too much cycle time that the volume that's there is just waiting for nobody, right? So let's go to the other side of the spectrum. Calculus, right? If we decided to do an integral underneath this thing, we could do hundreds of minute specific traffic plans to an infinite degree, right? To get the perfect representation of how much traffic needs to occur on that. I'm not going to do that. Even with AI, it's the third time AI has come up, it's not going to happen. This computer cannot do that number of computations, right? That's not a thing. Our happy medium is deciding, maybe we have 5 to 7 specific traffic plans that are able to accommodate specific traffic directionality or characteristics or volume levels, and then we're best able to serve it during that time. right? So at 6 o'clock in the morning, we might not want to run a 120-second cycle. We might only want to run a minute-long cycle, right? So it's just being able to bend that to the course of the day, and then we create these signal timing diagrams for each of those plans, right? So they each have their own kind of flavor to it. If you look at some of these, I know they all look the same from probably your angle things, but they're all different cycles. They're all consistent with what these things are. There's directionality where maybe there's an inbound commuter thing, or there's a PM outbound, or there's a middle of the day balance thing. Perfect. And then, so that's we're talking just about traffic with all this, right? I told you that we do more than traffic. Let's get into it. Speed control. So one of the things we can do with traffic signal timing is we can control your speed, or you can suggest speed that you go. So on the left here we have a 35 miles per hour signal timing optimization. If you look at these blue lines, if you travel 35 miles an hour, or the red lines, you're going to come into a red and you're going to have to wait, right? But if we sign that same corridor, this is the same exact timing. If we sign that as a 25 mile per hour optimization, you're traveling a slower speed and you get through that green, right? You just have to know, the driver would need to know that they should travel 25 miles per hour, right? So you communicate that by saying, hey, if you go this speed, you'll get rewarded with a green time. Whether or not they do it or not, that's up to them, right? They can still go faster, but we're rewarding them with that green time. Another thing we can do, harmonic cycles. So we talked about how cycle lengths are important. This is down in Burnsville. This is a true, actual cycle length. 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes of cycle time. These are big, right? This is suburbia. So this is 42 right here, major throughput of people driving for the whole region. If you're in that mall spot at that 80-second cycle, you don't want to wait that full amount of time that 2 minutes is. But you still want to have some type of coordination between these two. We can do a harmonic cycle. And that's essentially saying, hey, let's do a multiple of that cycle to fit within that cycle. So here we have 2 cycles of 80 for every 160-second cycle. So if every other blue is coming into that 160, right? Whereas every red is going through because they're kind of going every second 80-second cycle. So that's kind of a cool way to think about the context of fitting things to the people that are there. And we take that to the nth degree. We did some signal timing work in LA for their stadium, essentially NFL event plans, right? When the game is done, how do we get people out of here safely? 232-second cycle, that is nearly 4 minutes. That sucks, right? And there's a lot of stuff going on, and there's a lot of traffic, there's a lot of people, we're separating movements, there's just a lot of things happening. So we ended up having 1 or 2 critical spots that needed that amount of time. We're not going to have that throughout the whole city of Inglewood. It doesn't make any sense, right? So we made these main corridors 116 seconds because then that could fit every half. And then if you're in this neighborhood, you don't even want to wait 2 minutes either. So why not make that half of that cycle? I just thought it was a cool way to show, oh, we have a quarter of a cycle to a half of a cycle to a big cycle. Another thing we can do is transit signal priority. Metro Transit does a lot of these. Woo, woo, woo. Does anybody know what TSP is? Is what kind of the logo is? We got some hands. I'd love to see that. Numtots and Nite. So the idea behind this is that if you have a bus that's running late, right, you want to get that bus to be on time because it needs to be at a certain spot at a certain time. What it can do is it can send a call to the signal, and then that signal knows, hey, you need to give, if you give a little bit of extra time to that, they can make that green instead of having to wait all this extra time to get the green that would service them there, right? So that's kind of one of the ways that you can kind of help all operations of transit. With BRT, Beeline has this. Different versions of the light rail have this. It's a little bit different priorities, a different thing with the light rail, but same idea. And with that, do we have time for one more slide? Because guys, I'm gonna be real. This is gonna be controversial here. Okay. Okay. We need to talk about beg buttons. I know. How I learned to stop worrying and not hate the term beg button. I'm gonna make a claim here that beg buttons are not the boogeyman that the advocacy community claims that they are, and here's why. If you're not aware of the term beg button, it's kind of a boogeyman term for pedestrian push button, and I understand the thought, right? There you have a lot of systems, a lot of agencies will put pedestrians and non-motorized vehicles to the very lowest priority of the ladder, right? And so the term is that, oh, you need to beg for your chance to get served at this traffic signal, okay? I get it, I definitely get it, but I've got 3 reasons why we still need these, even if that is the case. And the first one, ADA compliance, right? If you're a visually impaired user, you need to know where the signal is and when you can go to cross that signal, right? So even if, we'll get into different operations later in a bit, but regardless, you need to know by law where you are and when you can safely cross that signal, okay? The second reason is context, right? Context is extremely important because here in Minneapolis, my wife and I live on the Leaning Tower in Lyndale, essentially, right? There's plenty of people and there's short crossings. Perfect, we love it. A lot of places in Minneapolis do not have, their button doesn't do anything, right? It's called a pedestrian recall. It's gonna give you time whether your pedestrian is there or not, right? You're always gonna get that time. So the reason that works is because we have such short crossings here in Minneapolis, and that's great, right? That's why we live here, that's why we're urbanists, right? We want that type of thing. If you live in Apple Valley, it's different, right? Because you might have 5 pedestrians a day, right? You might have a 40, if you were to make that crossing, that might take like 40 seconds to cross that pedestrian time, right? And if there's no pedestrian there to take that, you're just wasting time for everybody. It's not just vehicles, it's for you as a person walking on an opposing movement, it's for vehicles with fire department or ambulance, it's everybody, right? And then the more of that, like, what am I waiting for nobody that occurs, right? If you were to have at the middle of the night, midnight in Apple Valley, if you had a 40-second wait for nobody, people aren't gonna wait for that, right? The whole idea of traffic signals working is that we all agree that they work, right? That's all it is. It's just a psychological trick that says, hey, we all decided green means green, right? If nobody wants to do that, if you break that societal agreement, that's even worse, right? So that's one aspect of it, and the final aspect that might be the most controversial is that the idea of every person, every user within the signal still needs a place to call, right? They just might be doing it in a different way. If you're taking a left, you don't get that left turn time until you drive over that detector, right? Just as if you're pushing this button, you won't get that time until you push that button. Now, the counter to that, which I think is valid, is why don't we make it so that you can just stand in a certain spot and we'll give you that time. And that's valid. There's many places that are trying that. I think Minneapolis is doing that in a few locations. Portland is big with it. Seattle loves it. It's called passive detection. You still need to figure out, if you're a blind user, where you need to stand and how do you know that it's giving you that time. There's other things that we can also do with this current APS, right? We talked about in the last presentation. We had there's some communities I've read in like Hasidic Jewish communities that they on Shabbat they can't push a button or they can't turn on a switch. These can detect when you're nearby just by essentially having a sensor right in the middle of here, right? So some places do that. During COVID, before we knew how these actually worked, or before COVID was transmitted, we made it so that these were either all on recall or you could wave in front of them and it would give you that same time. So there's kind of balances that we can do to that. I don't disagree that passive detection is important and it's something we need to think about and we can try it. Why not try it? It's just, the term, like the idea of a beg button is like, I feel like people are more upset about the idea of the beg versus just having shitty land use, right? People are more upset because you have to cross 40 seconds for a crossing, right? Or having a hostile pedestrian environment. Those things all suck, right? This thing is kind of helping us get to the middle ground there while we fix the other fuck up stuff that the suburbs are, right? You know, we have 4 to 3 lane conversions, we have bump outs, we're slowly fighting the fight this is kind of an intermediate thing. And I understand the thought behind it. If you're seeing a spot that isn't running these things the right way or in the best way, I highly encourage you to call up 311 or your local agency. I don't have anybody. The last time I was at this presentation, I had with some Minneapolis folks, and they're not here tonight, but they would love to get your 311 calls. So you pay your taxpayer dollars, make sure that you're getting represented with that. And this might be a little counterintuitive, and I know that a lot of this stuff is really like kind of heady, and it's probably more math than people want to have on a Tuesday night. But you know what? That's kind of just the way things are in the traffic light zone. So I also mentioned too, we've got these up here. We'll bring up my laptop at the end if people want to see like a model in action and see how things work. Yeah, question. Yeah.
So I've vaguely heard that like there are places like Jackson Street or downtown St. Paul where it's like, okay, that's like the premier bike route because they've like designed the lights to like be better work for that speed of traffic.
Yep.
In like 30 seconds or less, what do you do to a cycle lane like accommodate, you know, the 20 mile an hour?
Sure. Well, honestly, I think the interesting thing is it doesn't necessarily follow, like, it's still dependent on volume, essentially, right? Like, especially at Jackson, your governing factor is probably the sum of your pedestrian times, right? That's kind of the lowest you can go, right? The spacing doesn't necessarily need to change much, though, right? It's more about the spacing of the intersections from each other, right? So we would do that when I used to work at CDOT, we would do a similar thing where this is marked as a 30 mile per hour because they don't do the 25 there, but we put in a brand new bike lane, right? Well, if I can't get a good progression at the posted speed limit, don't tell my old boss that I did this, but if we couldn't get a good speed limit at 30, I'm going to post it, I'm going to make the model show 15 to 20 because that's the speed that a bike is going to go. So at least somebody gets it, and then there's a potential overall benefit that people travel a slower speed, right? We all seen that graphic of every additional 5 miles per hour, you have kind of an exponential risk of crashes, of fatalities of crashes. So I think that answers what you're saying, but if it doesn't, let me know. Okay, go for it. So I think there's two answers to this. I think there's going to be more CVs out there, connected vehicles, sorry, jargon and letters and alphabets. So the connected vehicles are probably in there more, so those will program. In theory, they can understand what the progression pattern would be and just travel the same speed, right? I used to think that was going to be the thing, but I don't know, if that was utopian me and I'm seeing our current state of things, and I don't think people are going to do the rational thing. I think they're going to never let go of their ability to drive. Really bleak, it's like the Twilight Zone, right? It's not supposed to be necessarily optimistic. The other thing is that a potential answer is like AI, but not AI. There's a lot of systems that are called adaptive systems that they don't use these cycle lengths, right? This is all models that we made. There's systems that you can integrate and the system does the work for you, right? And I hate that. Even as outside of being a traffic engineer, I hate that, right? Because AWS just went down the other day, right? Like, we can't have our systems be dependent on something like that. Not even to mention that, okay, now we have subscription-based things, and what do they take away, and then the enshittification of our taxpayer system. Like, what other things can we do that, if it was my call, this wouldn't change much. But the thing that would change is we're doing more big data. We're doing more like the ability to pull information from detectors and from the signals where they log this, right? So I have another selling point for the beg button is that in Dakota County, we did this where I wanted to try something really Cadillac and great for these pedestrian operations right by a school. but I needed to build a case for a commissioner, so I was able to collect all the data of the button pushes that happen there. And this is, you can do this for tons of different variables, right? But it's just mountains and mountains of data. So that's probably the way that things are going. Instead of using one day as a representative day, you have just kind of a more rich data set of things. And that's why I'm married to a data scientist, so I'm really hoping that she can help me out later down the line.
So you may have kind of answered the question, but like the passive button, like the passive stuff is not when you're walking. It's more like late at night. I'm an Uber driver, and I just don't see why you need to wait for 2 to 3 damn minutes on a light where there's no one there. So I would love to see adaptive systems that work in tandem during times where there's like no traffic.
And to be fair, like a normal operation is that, right? Like you, in theory, you're always responding to the people that are present at that detector, right? It's up to you to build, or up to me and traffic engineers to figure out the best representation of what that is. The more data we have, the easier it is to do that. Or wild. Yep. There's no ethics training out of this, no. Yep. So I work for Dakota County. I'm our county traffic engineer. And I also am side note, I got a side consultant gig. So if you're an NFL team owner, please let me know. I'd love to help design your stuff.
Okay, I'm sorry, I have a follow-up question. How close do you think we are to prioritization of
We have it in many locations. Yep.
But I mean, like universally?
I don't know much about the Minneapolis way that things are. My buddy's works for Minneapolis. He does the signal timing for them. He could tell you, but I don't. See me afterward. But I mean, there's no reason why it shouldn't, right? We have routes that go on, and I think the bigger thing is making sure we have the capacity within the controllers to do it, because not every controller is able to handle that. And then you need to make sure that it's a TSP route, or a transit route that's late a lot, right? Because I don't know. I don't have a number for you. 100.
They have a question.
Oh, go for it.
What did you see that you guys were looking for something like intersections or like reroutes and stuff like either periodic data or things like that? Or the push switch data from the
Sure.
like what is that initiation process look like?
Right. So kind of like traffic industry standard is like every 3 to 5 years. When I was a consultant here in Minneapolis, we did the Minneapolis signal retime for the whole city, and they actually had a good amount of these old school ones in there, so they replaced all these and updated them. They did that in 2011, and the last one they did was 1980, I think. And they're doing the next one, they're getting the RFP set, right? But for us, our major corridor, we haven't done it in 7 years, and we're probably getting close to getting it. We do a lot of like tweaks when 311 calls come in, or like somebody complains about it. But yeah.
What would it take to bring the traffic timing systems from the Netherlands over here?
Oh, great question. Great question. Not much, but it's kind of more of an industry difference, right? We've got some really good questions tonight, man. I love that. So what he's kind of getting, so Chicago has a similar setup as Netherlands does, where it's, instead of having specific phases, you've kind of got like an interval, right? So the cool thing about the phases is they're standardized and they make sense, and the controllers all think in that way, right? But you can do a lot more different things when you get really goofy, weird, bizarre intersections. So you're kind of blowing up what the intersection is to do some of that unique things that he's getting at. I don't know a great way to get what you're saying, but certain things that they're doing, we're trying and we're using them here. So, especially in like Portland or Minneapolis or Seattle, places like that. Yep. San Francisco. Yep. Oh, I'm so sorry. Are you taking the light rail or are you taking a car?
Car. So I usually go down Minnehaha.
You should take the light rail on Minnehaha.
I understand. But is it purposely timed so that people aren't like speeding down it, or is it just, or it's just us?
So the reason that this is all working in a perfect vacuum, right? Like, oh, this cow is a perfectly spherical, frictionless thing, right? This is all a model, right? But anytime a fire department call comes through or anything else comes through, it throws these things off in a transition, right? So they're off of the cycle coordination they should be. So as a result of that, when the light rail comes through, it gives priority to the light rail, and you kind of got like a consistent. There's just a lot of transitioning that's occurring. So what you're seeing when you drive down Minnehaha is probably just the fact that they don't. There's no need to really try to make it work. They might have one plan that might work, and you just always happen to be getting that 5 minute. As soon as it gets transitioned, another train comes through, right? So yeah, get rid of the rail. We'll be good. I did not say that. I want to make sure that's not that. Sure.
All right, so really quick preface. One of the big takeaways on the Bears equipment is the speed limit is sometimes an amateur. Like, it's not a challenge. I'm curious what other answers you could give us to have a better experience when we're out and different.
As a user, or how the system should be to make it easy?
How, as a user, yes, as a user.
How to get better use out of. I'm very confused. I'm sorry. One more time.
Like what are the things that maybe we don't know that might make it easier for us getting down the corridor, or per situation, or
some people really like NPR. I love Just the Dead Jams 4-hour playlist. Being calm and relaxing and not being a spaz when you don't exactly get the prioritization that you think you should get. And bike or take transit. Get out of the car and read, listen to a podcast, listen to whatever, look out the window. I think that so much stress just exists when you're in the road. Like, it takes me 30 minutes to go from Apple Valley to my place in Minneapolis, and like, man, I could have been fucking reading right now. I could have been doing anything else right now. So that's my answer. I know it's not really an answer, but just college, right? And I think that's it. So